Story 1: The Old Woman in the Corner. I never believed in sleep paralysis until it happened to me. I'd heard stories, but I always thought they were exaggerated. After what I went through, I wish they were just stories. It was a regular Tuesday night, and I was exhausted from school and practice. I remember crawling into bed around 11 p.m., ready to crash. I fell asleep instantly. At some point during the night, I woke up. At first, everything seemed normal. My room was dark, and I could hear the faint hum of my fan. But something was different. I couldn't move. I tried to sit up, but my body wouldn't respond. My mind was racing, but I was completely paralyzed. Panic crept in as I realized I was stuck. That's when I noticed it. Something was in the corner of my room. My heart started pounding as I focused on the shape. It was an old woman, crouched down, staring at me. Her skin was gray, and her eyes were completely black, like two pits. She was wearing a tattered dress, and her hair hung in thin, tangled strands over her face. She didn't move at first. She just sat there, watching me. I could feel her eyes burning into me, filled with something dark and evil. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I was completely helpless. Then, she started to move. It was slow at first, like she was deciding what to do next. Her head tilted to the side, and she grinned, showing rotten teeth. That grin, it was the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. She began crawling toward me on all fours, her bones cracking with every movement. I could hear her nails scraping against the floor as she got closer. The sound still echoes in my mind. I tried with all my strength to move, to wake up, to do anything. But I was trapped. She climbed onto the bed, her face inches from mine. Her breath was hot and rancid, and I felt her bony hand press down on my chest. It felt like a weight crushing me. Her black eyes were locked onto mine, and I swear she whispered something, but it was in a language I couldn't understand. I thought I was going to die right there, suffocated by this nightmare. Then, all of a sudden, she vanished. Just like that. I could move again, and I shot up, gasping for air. My heart was racing, and I was drenched in sweat. The room was empty, but I still felt her presence, like she was lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to fall asleep again. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I couldn't. I kept every light on until morning. I've had sleep paralysis a few more times since then, but it's never been as terrifying as that night. I still see her sometimes, just out of the corner of my eye when I'm about to fall asleep. I can't shake the feeling that one day, she won't just disappear. Story 2: The Man at the Foot of My Bed. I used to laugh when people told me about sleep paralysis. I always thought it was just your mind playing tricks. That was until it happened to me. Now, I wouldn't wish this on anyone. It was a typical weekend, and I had stayed up late watching YouTube videos in bed. I finally decided to call it a night around 1 a.m. I remember drifting off to sleep without any trouble, but something woke me up a few hours later. I couldn't tell what time it was because my phone was out of reach, and that's when I realized I couldn't move. My body was stiff, completely frozen. I tried to wiggle my fingers or even blink, but nothing worked. My eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, and all I could think was that something was wrong. The room was dead silent, but it felt heavy, like the air was thick and pressing down on me. Then, I noticed him. At the foot of my bed stood a man. I could barely make out his features, but he was tall and skinny, with a distorted face. His eyes were sunken, and his skin was pale, almost gray. He was dressed in what looked like an old, dirty suit. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at me. I was terrified, but I couldn't do anything. My mind was screaming at me to get up, to run, to do something, but my body was completely locked down. I could feel my heart racing in my chest, pounding so hard I thought it might explode. The man didn't make a sound. He just kept staring, like he was waiting for something. Then, slowly, he started to move closer. It wasn't a normal walk. It was more like he was gliding across the floor, his feet never really touching the ground. He came right up to the side of my bed, leaning in so close that I could feel his cold breath on my face. His eyes, there was something wrong with them. They were black, but they seemed to swirl, like there was something alive inside them. He opened his mouth as if he was going to speak, but no words came out. Instead, it was this low, growling sound, like something straight out of a horror movie. I could feel tears welling up in my eyes. I was trapped in my own body, forced to stare into this thing's eyes. I was sure I was about to die. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it ended. The man vanished, and I could move again. I shot up, gasping for air and grabbing my phone to check the time. It was only 3 a.m., but I felt like I had been trapped for hours. I didn't go back to sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. That was the first time I experienced sleep paralysis, and I still have nightmares about that man. The worst part is that sometimes I think I see him in the shadows when I'm alone, like he's waiting for another chance to visit. Story 3, my first encounter with sleep paralysis. I've always heard people talk about sleep paralysis, but I never believed it could be that terrifying. That all changed a few months ago. I still get chills thinking about it. It was a Friday night. I remember it clearly because I had just finished watching a horror movie marathon with my friends. We joked about how none of us would be able to sleep afterward. Little did I know, sleep would be the least of my worries that night. I went to bed around midnight, feeling uneasy. My room was dark, and the only light came from the moon peeking through my blinds. I fell asleep pretty fast, but a few hours later, I woke up. Or at least, I thought I did. My eyes were open, and I could see my room, but something was off. I couldn't move. At first, I thought I was dreaming. I tried to lift my arm, but nothing happened. My body felt like it was glued to the bed. Panic started to set in. I could hear the faint hum of my fan, but everything else was eerily quiet. The kind of silence that makes your heart race. That's when I noticed it. In the corner of my room, near the door, something was standing there. It was tall, almost hitting the ceiling. Its figure was shadowy and distorted, like smoke trapped in a bottle. It didn't have a face, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My chest felt tight, like something heavy was pressing down on it. The figure started to move, slowly creeping closer to my bed. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. I knew this couldn't be real, but it felt too vivid, too horrifying to be a dream. The shadow stopped at the foot of my bed. I could feel its presence, cold and menacing. Suddenly, it leaned down. I could sense its breath on my face, even though it didn't have a mouth. It whispered something, but the words were jumbled, like a broken radio signal. I couldn't understand it, but I felt an overwhelming dread in my gut. Then, everything went silent again. The figure straightened up and slowly backed away into the shadows. For a moment, I thought it was over. But just when I started to feel relief, the figure lunged at me. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I tried to scream again, but my voice was trapped in my throat. And just like that, it was gone. I gasped for air as I finally regained control of my body. My heart was pounding, and I was drenched in sweat. I shot up from my bed, turning on every light in my room. There was nothing there. No shadow, no figure, just me and my messy room. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in my bed with the lights on, trying to convince myself it was just a nightmare. But deep down, I knew it was something more. I had experienced sleep paralysis for the first time, and it was worse than any horror movie I had ever seen. I've had a few more episodes since then, but nothing as terrifying as that first encounter. I've read up on sleep paralysis, and people say it's just your brain playing tricks on you while your body is stuck between sleep and wakefulness. But honestly, it felt too real to be a trick. I still sleep with a nightlight now. I know it sounds childish, but after what I went through, I'm not taking any chances. If I see that shadow again, I want to be ready. Thanks for reading, and if you've ever experienced sleep paralysis, just know you're not alone. Story 4: The Shadow That Follows Me. I've always been a heavy sleeper. I can sleep through thunderstorms, alarms, you name it. But a few months ago, I experienced something that shook me to my core, something I wish I could forget. It was a random Tuesday night. I remember being exhausted from a long day at school and a shift at work. I went to bed earlier than usual, hoping to catch up on some sleep. I drifted off quickly, like usual, but at some point during the night, I woke up. I don't know what time it was, but my room was pitch black. At first, I thought I was dreaming because something felt off. Then I realized I couldn't move. My body was completely frozen. I tried to turn my head, but it was like I was strapped down. Panic started to build when I realized I couldn't even speak. I could only move my eyes. That's when I noticed it, this dark figure standing in the corner of my room. It looked like a shadow, but darker, almost like it was made out of pure darkness. I couldn't make out any details, but I knew it was staring right at me. The longer I stared back, the more I felt like it was getting closer. My chest felt heavy, like something was pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I could feel my heart racing. I tried to scream, to do anything to wake myself up, but nothing worked. The shadow slowly started to move. It didn't walk or glide, it just seemed to get closer, like the darkness itself was growing. I couldn't see its face, but I felt this intense hatred coming from it, like it was angry at me for being awake. It stopped right next to my bed, just inches from my face. I could feel a cold breeze, like something was sucking the warmth out of the room. My eyes started watering from how hard I was trying to move, but my body was still locked in place. I was convinced it was going to attack me, that this was the end. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. The pressure on my chest lifted, and I could finally move again. I shot up, gasping for air and looking around my room, but there was nothing there. No shadow, no sign of anything wrong, just me, drenched in sweat and shaking. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I just sat there with the lights on, waiting for the sun to come up. It took me a long time to feel comfortable sleeping again. Even now, months later, I still see that shadow out of the corner of my eye when I'm alone. It's like it's still watching me, waiting for the right moment to come back. Story 5: The Whispering Voice. I used to think sleep paralysis was just your brain playing tricks on you. I'd seen videos and heard stories, but I never took them seriously. That was until it happened to me, and trust me, it's way worse than anything I could have imagined. It was late at night, and I had just finished studying for an exam. I was drained, so I crashed into bed and fell asleep almost immediately. A few hours later, I woke up in the middle of the night. At first, I didn't think much of it. I thought maybe I just needed to adjust my blanket or something. But when I tried to move, nothing happened. My body wouldn't respond. I couldn't move my arms, my legs, not even my head. My eyes were wide open, and all I could do was stare at the ceiling. My first thought was that I was having a nightmare, but everything felt too real. The room was exactly as it should be, my desk, the posters on my wall, even the little light blinking from my computer. That's when I heard it. A whisper. At first, it was faint, like it was coming from far away. But it grew louder, more insistent. It sounded like someone was right next to me, whispering in my ear. The voice was deep and raspy, like it had been smoking for years. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was menacing, like it was mocking me. The whispering continued, growing more aggressive. I felt this overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. I knew whatever was whispering wasn't human. I could feel its breath on my neck, even though nothing was there. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I just wanted it to stop. Suddenly, the whispering cut off, and the room went silent. But the silence was worse. I knew something was still there, lurking in the darkness. My eyes shifted to the corner of the room, and that's when I saw it, a figure crouched in the shadows. It was hunched over, almost like it was waiting for me to notice it. Its eyes, if you could even call them that, glowed a sickly yellow. It didn't move, but I could feel its gaze burning into me. It was just sitting there, watching, waiting. My mind was screaming at me to wake up, to move, to do anything, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I was stuck, trapped in this nightmare, with no way out. Finally, after what felt like hours, the figure slowly faded away. The pressure on my body lifted, and I could move again. I immediately jumped out of bed, turned on every light in my room, and just stood there, trying to catch my breath. I was shaking so bad I could barely think straight. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, and now, every time I go to bed, I'm terrified it will happen again. The worst part? Sometimes, when I'm alone, I still hear that whisper, just faint enough to make me wonder if it's really gone, or if it's waiting for me to fall asleep again. Story 6. The Voices in the Hallway. I've had sleep paralysis before, but it's always been quick, a shadow in the corner, a weight on my chest, the usual stuff. Creepy, sure, but nothing like what happened last night. Last night was different. It felt real, too real. It started like any other night. I was tired from a long day and ready to pass out. I remember checking my phone, 12:15 a.m. I rolled over, closed my eyes, and drifted off almost instantly. But it didn't last long. I woke up suddenly, feeling wide awake, like I'd been snapped out of a dream. My room was dark, but I could see everything clearly. Something was wrong, though. I felt this heaviness in the air, like a storm was brewing, but it was inside my room. I tried to sit up, but my body wouldn't move. I was frozen in place, stuck on my back, staring at the ceiling. At first, I thought, okay, it's just sleep paralysis. I've been through this before. It'll pass. But then I heard it, a soft shuffling noise, like someone was dragging their feet down the hallway outside my room. My heart started pounding because I live alone. The shuffling got closer, each step slow and deliberate. I could hear breathing, raspy and uneven, as if someone was struggling for air. My door was slightly open, and the hallway light was off, so all I could see was darkness beyond it. But I could feel it, something, was standing just out of sight. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt glued shut. Suddenly, the shuffling stopped. The silence was deafening. Then, a whisper came from the hallway. At first, it was just one voice, mumbling in a low tone, like it was having a conversation with itself. Then, it grew louder, like there were multiple voices, all talking over each other. They were fast and frantic, like arguing or chanting in some language I didn't recognize. The voices weren't human, they were distorted, almost mechanical, like something was imitating speech but getting it wrong. I was terrified, but what happened next made my blood run cold. The door creaked open, just a fraction, but enough for me to see a shadow slip into the room. It was tall, too tall to be a person, with limbs that seemed stretched and twisted. The voices stopped the moment it entered, leaving only the sound of my own breathing, which was shaky and uneven. The figure moved closer, gliding over the floor without making a sound. Its head jerked in small, unnatural movements, like it was twitching, trying to figure out what I was. I kept telling myself, this isn't real. It's just in your head. Wake up! But no matter how much I tried to break free, I couldn't. The shadow leaned over me, its face hovering just inches above mine. It had no eyes, no mouth, just a void where its features should be. But I could feel its gaze, like it was peeling back layers of my mind, searching for something. Then it spoke. Not out loud, but in my head. It wasn't words, exactly, more like thoughts being forced into my brain. You're not alone. We're here. We've always been here. The voice echoed, bouncing around in my skull, growing louder until it was all I could hear. It was like they were digging, pulling at memories, twisting them into something dark and unfamiliar. Out of nowhere, the voices in the hallway returned, only this time they were inside my room. They surrounded me, laughing, mocking, their tones shifting between anger and joy. The shadow figure started to change shape, its body distorting into different forms. 1 second, it was a man, then a child, then something monstrous and animal-like. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Just when I thought I was going to break, everything stopped. The shadow, the voices, the pressure on my chest, it all vanished in an instant. I could move again. I sat up, gasping for air, my heart slamming in my chest. I immediately looked at the clock, 12:20 a.m. Only 5 minutes had passed, but it felt like hours. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I kept the lights on and stayed awake, afraid that if I closed my eyes, it would all come back. The worst part is, ever since that night, I keep hearing those whispers, sometimes in the hallway, sometimes right behind me, even when I'm fully awake. It's like they're waiting, watching, biding their time until I'm vulnerable again. And now, every time I walk down that hallway at night, I feel like something's just a few steps behind me, keeping pace, waiting for me to look back.